Bonjour, bonjour, bonjour. Welcome, friends and family. I'm so very excited to have you with us this evening. We're talking about something that is so near and dear to my heart, and I'm all the more privileged to be talking about it of late when I think science in general is being attacked. And so it's a privilege and pleasure to be able to get on here to talk science, to talk health, and especially debunk something that is so bunky right now throughout all the conversations that happen around genes, in particular one specific gene. And Dr. Varden, what gene is that?
The motherfucker gene, MTHFR,
No, I wasn't gonna.
disclosure of swearing.
So for those listening at home, there will probably be a swear jar, and we will probably be donating to a very worthy cause that counts up all the swears we have. We're challenged to ping pong it back and forth. I struggle a little bit with swearing, so I might be a little less frequent, but we are talking all things methylation. And whereas a lot of testing interpretation companies will focus exclusively on that motherfucker gene, or to be a little bit more pointed, MTHFR. We want to demystify that. We want to debunk that and talk about why it's really important to talk about the entire process versus just one gene. Yeah. So, Dr. Varden, why don't we start there? Why let's talk about the fact that when people think about methylation, right, they really usually only think about one gene. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how that came to be and why that's not necessarily helpful.
Well, unfortunately, we live in a reductionistic society. We want to be able to reduce things to just one thing. And let's fix that one thing that will solve all the problems.
Mhm.
Guys, it doesn't work like that. This is systems biology. Everything is connected. We work in pathways. One thing leads to another. You can think of it like those dominoes, those really intricate dominoes where you hit one and then it branches off and, it goes to an end. And it's the same type of thing.
Mhm.
There is a gene, that gene making a protein, that being one domino.
Mhm. Yeah.
It affects the next one down the line. But
Yeah, and
then it's that clickbait reductionistic, let's look at just one thing and that will solve everything.
yeah, and so I want to be fair to the history a little bit too, because I think what you're saying is very true. But I think additional to that, if we go back, once upon a time, and I think this was about 15, 20 years ago, hold me honest on timeline. We both know I don't do time, but 15, 20 years ago, there was a lot of research around this one gene and a lot of different outcomes. It started to become associated with certain congenital conditions. It started to become associated with certain cognitive conditions, certain detox conditions, amongst other things, right? So we had this budding immersion where there's this MTHFR gene, and it would beget these sorts of things. And as we began to further develop it, we understood why that was. It did not enable proper methylation or proper support, proper domino falling within a process. Now, that is kind of where, and I think your point, we've reduced it and stopped the conversation. We talk about that one gene in methylation, but what has progressed in the past 15, 10 years, whatever that timeline might be, is this unearthing of all the other dominoes and all the other important pieces. And I think what we as public scientists, public clinicians have not ushered in enough is conversation around those other dominoes and why they are as important as MTHFR, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you consider MTHFR or the original studies with folate, okay, B9, that's what we're talking about, okay. MTHF methyl tetrahydrofolate, folate B9.
Fancy
Okay.
words.
Really, the research was back like when I was born. We're talking the 1960s to 1980s. Okay.
Mhm.
Scientists were studying folate metabolism,
Mhm.
and They focused more on the relationship to things like anemia, neural tube defects, cardiovascular disease. And then I know that it ended up getting into homocysteine, which is an amino acid that's regulated by folate metabolism. All right. And that was associated or determined as a risk factor for heart disease. This is back in the 60s. Okay. And that's why they really started to dive into this. Is when, as research was continuing to develop, the MTHFR enzyme, okay, it was identified as critical for converting, okay, get this, it's a nice long word, 510 methylene tetrahydrofolate to 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, which I was just telling you, the MTHF. It's actually, you'll see a number 5, and you'll see this on your supplement bottles. It'll say 5 dash, MTHF. Well, that's what it is. And it's all about the way that they name things chemically. Oh, had a lot of fun with that in my organic chemistry class. Anyway, I digress.
You can tell who the nerds in the room are when they're looking lovingly back at Orgo, whereas most people are like, get away from me.
Exactly. So this, the 5-MTHF is the active form of folate, which is needed for homocysteine metabolism. And this works into that domino pathway, because you've got your methylation pathway, you've got the transsulfuration pathway going into glutathione conjugation, our detox, one of the main detoxification pathways and one of the main detoxification molecules of the body, which we're going to be touching on tonight. So all of this, they realized, holy moly, this is really important. So they really started focusing on this and identifying MTHFR mutations, which happened in the 90s. More of the mid 90s, when we really started getting into the genome project. So, this is something that's really important, because that became the highlight. That's what they had focused on, was that mutation, the C677T. Okay. We have since been able to expand that, because it was shortly after that the other variant was discovered, and realizing, hey, this also impacts. So it's really the burgeoning discoveries of
and
what are these functions.
And I think that's an important thing for people to understand. At no point in time was there anyone trying to deny information. It's just that naturally, as science and medicine progresses, you're going to naturally learn more and more. And this is where it becomes really important that your healthcare providers, or the people that you're pulling your science information from, are keeping up to date with these things, right? Because 10, 15 years ago, MTHFR really was the only story to be had. But we've had 10 or 15 years of research since then. So, Dr. Varden, let's ground ourselves first, and let's talk about what exactly is methylation and why do we care about it, and then maybe we start with the genes. I really want to ground people in, methylation, this word. If you're in any biohacking or any kind of like health circle, you hear this word a lot. Right. And I would imagine you've experienced this similar to I'll say, okay, have you heard of methylation? And someone will say, yes. I'm like, okay, well, what do you know about it? And usually they'll be very specific. They'll be like, I've heard about it in terms of hormones. So it does hormone stuff. Or sometimes people will say, oh, I've heard about it in terms of neurotransmitters. So it does brain stuff. And then someone will say, oh, I've heard about it in terms of DNA, right? And you can almost tell, you can trace back to what podcast or what author they've been reading, almost based on how they know about methylation. So talk to me about how all of these things are true insofar as methylation impacts hormones and neurotransmitters and DNA. Talk to me about what methylation is.
Okay. So first of all, methylation is what we scientists call ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It does a lot of things. And that's why, to what you were saying, people are like, oh, well, I heard about it in brain health, cardiovascular health, hormones. Yeah, because it does all of those things. So we've got one biochemical process that has a big job of doing many different functions. And really what it is, it takes a methyl group. Now, for those of you going back to your chemistry class in high school, a methyl group is a carbon with 3 hydrogens. And that molecule is being added to other molecules to change the function. One thing in science that is like a staple phrase, form equals function. And
Yeah.
completely honest, that's why proteins, if they're misfolded, they are not going to function properly, even though they have all of the particular parts and pieces they have. But if they're not bonded correctly, if they're not folded correctly, they're not going to work correctly.
You can kind of think about it like a lock and key, right? All keys more or less look the same, but if you get into the structure of the key, the moment you add an extra tick, you change that form of the key, you change the function of the key. It no longer goes in this door, it instead goes in that door, or it goes in no door.
Correct. And the process, it occurs in DNA.
Mhm.
It occurs in proteins, in neurotransmitters, and in other molecules of the body. That's why I was saying it is ubiquitous. So, excuse me, one of the most important or crucial forms of methylation is in DNA methylation, because this influences gene expression. And that's something that we've talked about ad infinitum when it comes to epigenetics. How are our genes being expressed, which also affects cellular function? So when we're talking about methylation, you know, I've already said how it's involved, and Dr. Kosterman has mentioned the other biological functions, the other areas, the other systems that are being affected: detoxification, neurotransmitter production, hormone balance, immune function, all of these things. Really, the most important thing that you need to understand is that the process is working correctly. and there are different areas of that pathway where a wrench can be put in. There can be some blocks. Things are not processing correctly, because for this process, for the dominoes, when you hit one and they start tumbling, well, say you have a couple dominoes missing, guess what? That next one is not going to get hit for the process to continue. So that type of thing is when cofactors are missing, lack of nutrients, the nutrient deficiency. And this is where the B vitamins come in. Vitamins are very important for that methylation process to happen. And, you know, that's something that I love about the personalization of our DNA 360, is because we look at those genes. What forms of some of those B vitamins do you need to make this process work efficiently, correctly? And I know that you have some very personal stories and, you know, case studies that perfectly show this.
Yeah. So to loop this back to what we first said, right? Most people, when they've heard of methylation, they've heard of MTHFR. And it's commonly available, right? In terms of DNA testing, there's a lot of places that you can go and have this tested. So it's not uncommon for someone to come to my desk and be like, I know my MTHFR and I'm suboptimal, therefore I take. Most people know if you have a suboptimal MTHFR, traditionally, the advice was go take a methylfolate or a methyl B9 to address that, right? And then coupled to that, people will be like, okay, well, I know with methylation B12 is one of those other factors. So you should also take that activated B12, which is also called methylcobalamin, right? Both of these start with methyl and then the B vitamin. So the story that Dr. Varden is alluding to, I was a very, very headstrong little child, and when I was 10, I decided I was going to stop eating animals because that was cruel. And if you could eat vegetables, why would you eat animals? And so at 10, God bless my parents, I'm so sorry. I became plant-based, and their feedback to me was more or less, okay, as long as you do it in a healthy way. So my 10-year-old self went to the library and tried to understand what is healthy, what is missing in a vegetarian diet. And what is missing in a vegetarian diet is vitamin B12. So then I furthered the research and I said, okay, what's the best form of B12 that I could be taking? Because when I went to the drugstore, there were all these big words and I didn't understand. One of the bottles that, my books told me was okay said methyl B12. And, I was 10. I don't know how great my research actually was, but I was like, oh, I should take the active form. I should take this. So for the audience, that's methyl B12, right? And I started taking this. And I took it, God bless myself. I took that for 25 years because for 25 years I was plant-based. I'm no longer, but a long beat, I was plant-based. And I was taking this again because it was the active and best form. And um, at some point in time, I think it was probably about a year before I transitioned my diet, I got my genes. And my genes told me, based on my methylation profile, based on my genes, methyl B12 was not a good pick for me. It was kind of like tossing the wrench in the proverbial machine so that methylation could not move forward. Right. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. I've been taking it forever. I'm sure I'm going to be fine. So I stopped taking it. I stopped taking it. I switched my forms of B12. I was still taking B12, but I switched the form. I switched to something that my genes were a little bit more happy with, adenosylcobalamin. And honestly, within, I think it would have 3 to 7 days, depending on what I was looking at, I experienced quite a difference in health. I found my brain function got a little bit better. It wasn't marked. It wasn't like I went from can't think to now I can think everything, but things got a little bit more clear. I found my skin became a little bit less reactive. I didn't have markedly reactive skin, but sometimes like if I bumped it the wrong way, I'd get a little bit of a reaction there. And what I learned by cleaning this up, right, was how it was really, it didn't disable me. I was still functioning. I was still fine. I made it through life, but it did create this low grade inflammation within my body that when I switched my supplementation, when I was more informed by genes, right, my supplementation better supported my body. And interestingly, like I can tell when I am exposed to it. And what do I mean by that? So I'm a naturopath. I go to a lot of conferences in order to keep my education up to par. And at those conferences, you'll see a lot of supplement vendors and they're always throwing things at you. And myself being a curious little bee, I'm like, sure, I'll take everything. I'm a little guinea pig. I will experiment with myself. And I remember taking this one supplement and it was positioned as something for nitric oxide. And afterwards I got really red and I felt really sick. And I was like, what on earth is in this? That doesn't make sense. And I looked at the ingredients and it was methyl B12 and my body had quite a quick reaction to it. Yeah, and again, I'm a canary. I want to be plain to the audience. You're probably not going to express as much as the delicate little canary will, but I'm still kind of this beautiful case of how a simple small change and a simple agent, when mixed within the wrong DNA, can kind of have these big overarching impacts. And so that's what I want us to explore this evening, Dr. Varden, because I know you see this a lot in practice. I want to explore what is methylation doing from a clinical perspective, and how do we know if you're taking the right form? Because I will tell you in my practice, 80% of people that come to me before they have their genes are taking the wrong form of B vitamins. And I don't say that to scare people. I don't say that to be like, you should be scared of B vitamins. I just say that to mean the conventional advice, because of the motherfucker gene, is take everything methylated. And most people don't have genes that support that, right? So why don't we explore that a little bit? Dr. Varden, I've tossed out folate, I've tossed out cobalamin, B9, B12. Let's talk about the genes that speak to both of those.
Okay, so when we're talking about B9, folate, we are talking about the SHMT1 gene. Okay, so this gene is affected and can determine the type of folate, the form of folate you should be using. Okay.
Mhm.
So, for example, for the SHMT1, if you have a G, as in George, a GG version, that's considered optimal, the methylated form, your body knows how to recognize, it can utilize, and everything is happy in the world when it comes to folate.
The
Okay.
gods love you.
And, and not just that, but say The adenosylated form. Now, you're not going to be finding a supplement that says adenosyl folate. Doesn't come like that. It actually will say folinic acid. Now, if you have,
I know where you're going. This is so as I have a passion for methylation and people doing too much over methylation, Dr. Varden has a passion for folic acid. I love it. Let's hear it, girl.
So if you have an A variant in your SHMT1 gene, that means that you do not handle the methylated form of folate very well. And you could become overmethylated by taking it. And I'm going to shoot that back over to Dr. Kosterman as soon as I'm done with this to talk about overmethylation. What does that mean? What does it look like pathophysiologically or the presentation, the physical presentations of ways that you might be overmethylating? Mm-hmm. But let's back up a little bit. So if you have an A variant, either a GA or an AA, okay, you're not going to be able to handle that methylated form very well. So you really should be having the adenosylated form in the supplemental form of folinic acid. Now, this is different from folic acid. Folic acid is synthetic. It is not natural. You will not find it naturally in nature on this planet. Okay. It is human made. And actually in that synthetic form, it can actually disrupt and cause issues with the methylation pathway. So really, guys, stay away from that. Check your bottles, when you are taking a supplement. Yes, it's cheaper because it's synthetic, but take a look. Read your labels. If it says folic acid, throw it out. Get something else. Okay, please. You're looking for folinic acid. And the nice thing is that for people who may be a GG, I happen to be a GG, so I can take
walking amongst the blessed.
I can also take folinic acid. Yeah. Okay. I can take either form. My body knows what to do with it, and all is happy in the world. Yeah. So, like I said, unfortunately, it's just, the ones with the A allele have to be a little more mindful. And they do come in lozenge form, they come in pill form. I mean, it really depends, on what works best for you.
And let's also make sure we're backing it up a little bit too, because I want to hold honest. B9, we call it folate. And do you know where folate comes from? It comes from the word foliage, meaning dark leafy greens. Okay. And so I really want to be, there are clinical instances where you should be truly supplementing, but I always like to encourage people to go to their food first. And so if it is foliage, if it's something you find in a garden, if it's dark leafy and green, you're going to be getting some happy B vitamins in there, in particular B9, right? Again, there's going to be instances, talk with your clinician, where you truly should be supplementing, especially those with an MTHFR defect, right? But just also, I want to make sure we're grounded back to food as well, right? Our bodies rely on folate because once upon a time we were reliant on, our bodies were always expecting foliage to come in. Yeah. Yeah. All right. B12?
B12. Okay, so B12, the gene that we're looking at is MTR. So M is in Mary, T is in Tom, R is in Robert, MTR gene. And this helps us understand what form of B12, also called cobalamin, works best for us. So there again, the methylated form or the adenosylated form. So now, in respect to cobalamin, you will find adenosyl cobalamin, as an ingredient for a form of B12 that you can take. You can also find hydroxocobalamin, okay, just another form in the way that it is structured, usage, utilization, etc. So the difference being the MTR. So if you have an AA version, which again, thank you, I've
Look at the
I know
gods
with
loving
the
you.
AA. So again, I am personally able to take the methylated form. But if you have a G allele in that, unfortunately, you really should lean into the adenosylated form.
Mhm.
So, and then really it's a matter of looking at the FUT2 gene on whether or not you can utilize the pill form, because B12 needs to be actively transported from the gut into the bloodstream. How well is that happening for you? If you don't do it so well, then a lozenge would be better. So that way you absorb it right into the oral cavity, right into the bloodstream a little bit easier. So there's always keeping that in mind. And I didn't want to not mention that, because I don't want you guys to go out and go, oh, okay, so I have an A in there, and I have the G in there, I'm going to go get the pill form, when, oh, maybe the lozenge form is actually better for you. But I want to focus on the methylated aspect of that. Now, I have had clients, not have their DNA done yet, because I see clients, separately, independently, who haven't had their DNA done, although I eventually get them to do it because it's a lot more helpful. But, where they're taking methylated forms,
Mhm.
and they'll start having some issues.
Mhm.
And so that is a clue to me, going, maybe, until we
Mhm.
verify with their genes, maybe they are being overmethylated by taking the methylated forms. And this is where I want to hand it back over to you, Dr. Kosterman, on what is being overmethylated. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. And just before I jump into that, Luha, I hope I'm saying that right, or Luhu. I apologize, I'm definitely not saying that right. She asked if the questions and answers are open, and yes, they are. So if you have any questions for us, please do toss them into the Q&A. In approximately 20 minutes, Laura and I will jump in there and we'll start answering. So if you have questions, toss them in the chat to a certain extent. Like we're happy to get feedback live in the chat, but if it's a more pointed question of what do I do about X, Y, and Z, toss it in there. Okay. So now to this question of what does overmethylation look like? Because while I think most people's concern is undermethylation, right? That's to the end of this is why I take the methylfolate or the methyl B12. In my practice, at least, Dr. Varden, I think you echo this in our practices, we see more often than not people who are over methylating because the supplement industry is really pushing methylated B vitamins. I think when MTHFR became this sexy thing to talk about in health circles, supplement companies were like, cool, if that's popular, I'm going to put methylated Bs in absolutely everything. And to this day, I still see methylated Bs in supplement formulations where I sit there and I think, why on earth is it there? And there's no clinical reason, there's just a sales reason, because on the front they can say, hey, we have this methyl product, it's optimized. So I really encourage people, as you're looking through your DNA 360, which has all the genes that Dr. Varden is talking about, go through your cabinet or your wherever you keep your supplements and read through every single bottle. I promise it's going to show up in bottles it shouldn't be in and you don't expect it to be in. So oftentimes people are going to show up and they're going to be overmethylated, right? What does that look like? And I want to acknowledge this is a bit of a tricky conversation. It's kind of like saying, what does inflammation look like, right? And in every person, it's going to show up a little bit differently. Okay, so remember the things that methylation can help us with. Methylation helps with our neurotransmitters, right? For our catecholamines, it will turn them off. Really, it puts a tag on them and it says you can no longer connect to the receptor. So it turns them off. Okay. From an estrogen perspective, it will tag estrogen and turn it off. Insofar as saying estrogen, you can no longer engage with receptors. We're going to kind of kick off that process of getting rid of you. Okay. When it comes to DNA, it will attach to certain points of DNA, and that will either turn on or off a gene, right? The less the methylation, the more likely it is going to be turned on versus opposite, right? And so different genes you're going to want on. Some genes you really want methylated so they're not turned on. Other genes you want them very lowly so they're still active, right? So as well as it will support with certain immune functions, it really supports with a lot of tissue turnover, right? So when someone comes in over methylated, there's an element of it depends on what their weakest or overused system is, right? So some people will come in and they'll be very anxious because the way they're processing their neurotransmitters, they're not, they're either sticking around or they're leaving too quickly, right? There's a little bit of an imbalance there. For some people, sometimes with women, I'll see their estrogens are being either processed too quickly or not properly, right? And again, it's this very general term insofar as people tend to be just a little bit more sensitive, both in an anxious perspective and then sometimes also just within a body perspective. And I acknowledge and appreciate that's a very general description, right? But oftentimes you have to think through the fact that because methylation touches on everything, it's rarely ever going to be an exclusive root cause of a problem, but oftentimes it's going to be contributing to a bigger problem that you have. Okay. And so that would be oftentimes what you'll see. I think what we have not had space for in this conversation yet is COMT. And I really want to talk about COMT because I think it really further adds to this question of over and under methylating in a way that MTR and SHMT1 have not yet. Okay, so Dr. Varden, before I have you explain COMT to the happy people at home, what I want to do is I want to offer a little bit of an analogy, right? Because I think there's some people when they hear big science words, their brains turn off a little bit. It's kind of like me when I hear finance words, my brain goes, I don't know what you just said. so so I want to offer a little bit of an analogy. This is and if anyone is a sports fan, I apologize in advance because this analogy is already flawed. I was called out once. I presented this analogy to someone and the person said, "You don't know sports at all, do you?" And the answer is no, I do not. So you're watching a sports game. In this instance, it's going to be basketball. And hopefully this is going to work out well. So you're watching a basketball game. Between Laura and I, we've already established that in a basketball game, there's a lot of different players. Methylation, there's a lot of different players. Now think about this. If you're watching a basketball game and you're only focused on one player, you're only focused on one gene, you know what that player or that gene is doing. You know, does that person have the ball? Are they bouncing it? Are they shooting it? Are they doing ball stuff with it, right? Just like with a singular gene, maybe MTHFR, you know, is that a strong gene or a weak gene? Okay. Now, remember that this is a team sport, so you want to be watching all the players. That's a lot of the people that we've been talking about. Now, with basketball, the goal is to pass a ball back and forth, right? And that's what all the genes that we've talked about so far have done. They pass this ball back and forth, and the goal is to get it to the top of the court so that the shooter, I don't know if that's the right word, but the person who throws the ball at the net, right? So that that person can throw the ball. So there's kind of two parts to basketball, just like there's two parts to methylation. There's that team effort of getting the ball to the top. And then at the top of the court, there's this person, LeBron James, I know something, who shoots the ball, right? And so this is what COMT does, right? COMT kind of hangs out around the net and says, oh, great, I have a ball now and I'm going to shoot it. Okay. And so just think about this. Dr. Varden, I want you to talk a little bit about COMT and then we're going to come back to this analogy because I think it's really going to help people understand what it means to overmethylate in light of that person shooting the ball. It's, you get a basket, you don't get a goal. A patient taught me that. There we go.
All right. You know, the thing is that we haven't gone over our questionnaire, our poll questions.
Oh, look at you staying organized. I love this. Thank you.
I don't want to get too much further because I don't want to ignore that. So
Yeah.
let me do that and then we'll jump in and do some deeper explanation on COMT.
Okay, cool. Oh, this is kind of like a commercial break. I love it. Um, so for those that are frequent offenders at these webinars, you know that love to ensure that we're speaking to what you want to know. And clearly we've gotten a little bit too excited, but if the powers that be can toss up, thank you, Dr. Varden. If the powers that be can toss up our survey, we want to make sure we're honoring people. So we asked people, do you know anything about your methylation pathways, your detox pathways? We have family here tonight. 75% of people have said they've done their DNA 360. So I hope you had that open for when Dr. Varden was going through the different genes so you can hear into what you're like. Another 16% is kind of saying they've had it done with a different company, so they probably know just one or two SNPs of their MTHFR. And then another 20% has some more functional testing. So they don't necessarily know their genes, but they do know the B vitamin status that they have. Okay. The next question that we asked was just around signs of detoxification overload, right? Are they are they showing any signs of under overmethylation? Ooh, 60% of our audience is saying fatigue, headaches, brain fog. My heart. And then the balance of the issues between skin and hormones are equaled out. And then a happy 30% are saying no symptoms at all. So welcome. Welcome to the Dr. Varden crew of like the gods love you. um, the next question that we asked is, are you taking any B vitamins? 50% of our audience is taking methylated B vitamins. I am so curious of that 50% if this is a proper prescription. And please, you don't need to disclose your health status, but I'm so curious those that have their DNA 360 if they've adjusted based on what you know. And then the balance of the audience is saying they take other detox supports like glutathione. And then 30% of the audience are the curious of like, hey, I'm curious, what should I be taking? And I'm glad you're doing the research beforehand. Because I think supplements are not seen as powerful agents, and clearly they are. The last question that we had asked here was, how familiar are you with methylation detox pathways? 50% or 55% are really saying they've kind of heard about it, kind of the analogy of like, oh yeah, I know it's associated to neurotransmitters, hormones, but don't know much beyond that. And then a happy 7%, and I hope the 7% is happy, is really dove deep into it. So I hope we're honoring you this evening in the research that you've done. So Dr. Varden, let's talk about COMT, be that our LeBron James, or when we come back to the analogy, me at the top of the court trying to throw a ball at a net.
You are so cute. I love it. I mean, okay. So, when we're talking about COMT, so first of all, COMT, like she said, is that last player on that methylation team, putting that methyl group onto whatever the substrate is, whether it's a neurotransmitter, a toxin, a estrogen metabolite, whatever the case may be. So first of all, COMT, COMT, stands for catechol O-methyl transferase. So it is transferring that methyl group like we were just talking about. And it is really important when it comes to breaking down, metabolizing catecholamines. And you're probably going, what's a catecholamine? A catecholamine is a neurotransmitter. These are dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. All of these play very crucial roles in mood regulation, the stress response, cognition, and obviously methylation balance. Okay. So when it comes to the function of that COMT enzyme, it is breaking down dopamine, these stress, mood related neurotransmitters. Now, I don't want to ignore MAO, which is another gene that produces an enzyme that also helps to clear dopamine, and it really works in the areas of the brain. The COMT is more of the centralized, the frontal lobe, the areas. Think of it as the big brother. MAO is the little brother. He's doing more of the peripheral work. Okay. but they do work together and have similar and overlapping functions. But for the COMT, when we're talking about regulation of these neurotransmitters, again, like I said, it's that prefrontal cortex, okay, really affecting focus, memory, decision making. And, I also had commented how COMT, it metabolizes estrogens, those estrogen metabolites. How quickly are you clearing that? Because that can actually lead to higher inflammation. And like I said, I mean, there are so many different tangents we can go down because, again, methylation is so ubiquitous. It is affecting so many different things. But staying a little more focused, talking about the different variants. Okay, because I saw in the chat, like, Lou, who is like, COMT, what I need help with, yes, please. So, of course, what do we do? So COMT, when you have a slow COMT, that means that you are breaking down these neurotransmitters, dopamine, slowly. That can lead to higher dopamine levels in that prefrontal cortex. And then on the flip side, fast, it's breaking it down quickly, leading to lower levels. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, when you're talking about the relationship of COMT and motivation, okay, it depends on that dopamine curve. Too much dopamine, that can lead, to overstimulation, anxiety. It can impair motivation, that paralysis of analysis, fear of failure. It's also in the fact that dopamine is the pleasure and reward molecule. Okay. If you have a lot of it and you are binding it and you're in a happy place, you're not motivated to change what you're doing in the environment because you're in a happy place. Why would you leave a happy place? So there's not a lot of motivation. So now, granted, I'm focusing on COMT. There are other genes that are playing on this team that do play a factor in that spectrum of motivation, pleasure, reward, and everything else. But yes, I am reductionizing this slightly to stay focused.
You're good. You're good.
So say you are clearing fast. Well, that dopamine, if you are clearing it quickly, well, then your happy place, your happy, situation, the good food, oh, it's not doing it anymore. So there is more of that motivation. There is more of that, I want to seek getting another dopamine hit. So when you have, on that opposite end of too fast, so by the way, and I'm sure some of you are like, well, which variant is it? So COMT, if you have a GG, that's fast clearance. AA, slow clearance. AG, you're right in the middle. I happen to be right in the middle. I'm that AG person.
Yeah.
So, that really can start affecting that motivation.
Yeah.
Now, are you subject to just that? Absolutely not. You can adjust, you can change, you can what we call attenuate. Okay, change the expression. And I've mentioned this a few times on other webinars, that it's not just like turning the gene on and off. It's like having a dimmer switch. Okay, so one person may have a dimmer switch that has this much space to work within, another person may have this much to work within. But you can upregulate or downregulate. That's what we're talking about, attenuate, changing how much is being produced within those confines. So yes, you can make those changes through, some diet, nutrients, supplementation, etc. Also getting rid of toxins. Yeah, I always have to bring in the toxins and detox.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah.
But this, I hope that this gives a little bit better idea on what COMT is doing. I mean, I could give a whole lecture on COMT, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that I think that provides a little bit more of an insight, especially when you're talking about adrenaline, noradrenaline.
Yeah.
If you are slow and not clearing that, adrenaline, noradrenaline, that is that stress, that heightened state of excitement. And if you stay in that for a long time, you are staying in that, a little bit more of that anxiety, stressed state longer because you're not clearing it that fast. So,
Yeah. So I want to pull people back a little bit to the basketball court because I think this is really important to understand. So Dr. Varden has just very beautifully and with the brain and mind explained that COMT effectively can have three speeds, right? You have a very fast COMT that will clear things because it's attaching methyls really quick, therefore changing shape and form, right? You can have a moderate speed one, someone that's kind of in between. And then you can have a really slow COMT, right? Someone that's kind of like very lackadaisically putting that on. And this is really important to how you approach your B vitamins or other methylated things, right? You can take SAMe. SAMe is that last person, that last actor with COMT, okay? And this is why it's really important. And this is why I think, especially if you're experiencing some struggles with methylation or you think you're experiencing overall health issues, working with a provider, because I'm getting some really nuance here, but working with a provider is going to be really important. But remember, we talked about the team. We talked about MTR and SHMT1, and those are big players within the team, amongst others, right? And so you can support your team all you want. You can optimize your team. You can take the best form of B vitamins and whatnot. But if you get to the top of the court and your COMT is me, if you're slow, you can give me all the balls in the world that you want. They're not going in that net, or maybe 1 in 100 is going in the net, right? It's slow. And so you're going to be one of those people that you need to be very mindful of how much B vitamin you're taking, right? Independent, is it methylated or not? COMT is a rate setter. Okay. So if you are slow and you have me at the top of the court, you're not getting baskets. Whereas if you're fast, okay, you're that LeBron James of the world, you have a lot more flexibility with what you're supplementing. And I think this is really important for people to hear this evening, right? As Dr. Varnes talked about those different speeds, it's really important that thought goes into how you are supplementing, right? And this is really where you do need to have the testing and then separately working with a provider to fully understand. Because someone asked the question, who was it? I saw a little bit of a question as to like, so I switched and I'm always taking the same thing. There's going to be periods in your life where you're going to be switching up how much you want to be taking. Dr. Vernon just talked about how this influences motivation. We know it influences hormones. We know it influences detox, etc. If you're going through a period where those sorts of systems are taxed, you might need to be supporting the body with more compared to, when you're on vacation and the world is lovely, maybe not as much, right? I think there's an element of this is always going to be a bit of a moving target relative to the life. Do you agree? Do you shift how much B vitamins you're taking there, Lara?
oh, absolutely. And, this is another thing that I have said often to my clients in webinars and everything else. We are dynamic beings. We live in a dynamic environment. Well, now that we live in these boxes that are temperature controlled and everything else, that's, it's not as dynamic. But seriously, we have different seasons. We have different events that happen in our environment. We move through this world, and there is dynamicism in that. Also, what we are being exposed to. So why in the world would we think that our food should always be the same, that our supplements should always be static? No, they need to adjust with you. And that's why periodically, taking a little vitamin vacation, is your body still in need of some of these things? Now, granted, there are foundational supplements based on genetics that, yeah, there is some support that is going to be needed. But does it always have to be 1,000 milligrams of B12? Not necessarily. Look at your levels. This is where blood work comes in. Okay. Where are you? Are you able to utilize the B vitamins that you are taking in? if not, well, then we need to dig a little deeper and find out why not.
Mhm.
Maybe it's the form. Maybe you've got gut disruption maybe it's something that you are not able to break down the nutrients very well. And what is that? That's your gut. And,
Mhm.
the more research, and there are tens of thousands of studies
Mhm.
that look at gut brain connection, that look at gut immune system, at how much the gut impacts the body.
Yeah.
So, is there another way that you should be taking it? I've got several clients that do IV. Okay, B vitamins. If that is not something that you can do, or that is not available to you where you live, maybe doing a transdermal patch. You're able to absorb and utilize that, bypassing the gut. I mean, there are so many different ways, but it really is, working with a clinician, or a practitioner to determine what is the best form, not just in whether it's methylated, adenylated, hydroxyl, all of these different things, but also, can you do the pill, an oral? Should you be doing transdermal? Should you be doing IV? How does this work? But
Um,
keep it open for understanding how much.
I love the passion and the education you bring to being very specific and exacting around your supplements, be it how they are to be taken and what form. And I think to the audience out there, I think within the US, as health regulations are going to be shifting and um, quality assurance may not be top of mind of some companies as regulations change, I really, really, really encourage you to connect with a practitioner that is very well educated, as Dr. Varden is, on quality and form and how one takes it, because I think it's going to be all the more important because supplements are a game changer for a lot of people with certain health conditions, and you want to make sure that you're getting the proper one and a quality one. And I think that's really important. That's partially why we have a black label here, something that really, really, really focuses on quality vitamins. And so just something to be mindful of. I keep my head and heart, where patients are. I wonder if now's the time we start to transition to questions. Um, I just really quickly want to speak to two different things that I saw within the chat. Where is, oh, mon Dieu. There's two people with names that you asked questions. I'm going to speak to them and I apologize. I don't know your names anymore. We'll get there one day. But someone asked the first question of, they're a little bit confused around MTHFR. Okay. So my comment would be go into your 360 and see if one of your SNPs are suboptimal. We're very plain. We kind of have a thumbs up, thumb down system. So we look at two different SNPs. So think of MTHFR like a book. Okay. And we look at two SNPs or two pages in the book because, as you read any novel, we know that some pages are more important to the plot than others. Okay. So we look at two pages in the book of MTHFR. If either one of those have a thumbs down, okay, or it's either a yellow triangle or a thumbs down, it means you don't have a great SNP there. Okay. So the next thing that you want to be doing is going to your SHMT1. And as Dr. Varden just explained, this is going to be what educates you as to what form. Okay. Now, someone else in the chat said, based on what your MTHFR SNPs are, do we actually know how suboptimal, how poor producer you are? Because I think this is a really important point, right? I think when you listen to conventional podcasts on MTHFR, you listen to lectures on it, they kind of say if you don't have the SNP, the world is over and you're going to die and you don't have methylation. They don't say it so literally, but they impart that feeling, right? And so I want to speak a little bit to the percent compromise based on your SNP presentation. Okay, so we know we look at two different pages. And if you have one page that's completely blanked out, meaning you have the most suboptimal form there, but you have a good other page, right? Your function is down to about, it's only 40% the function of someone who has proper genes. right? And if the other SNP is also really bad, the worst you could get is you probably only have 20% function compared to someone who has perfect, right? And so the percentages based on what SNP presentation you have will range from you have about 20% in worst case scenario up to 80 or 90, again, depending on the SNP presentation. Okay, so I want to say a few things. Number one, if you have bad SNPs, you're still methylating, I promise. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here. And separate to that, it's really important to work with the provider to understand the compromise, not only that your genes are bringing about, but to Dr. Varden's point, what nutrition and stress and need and all the other fun things are going to be speaking to it there. All right, doctor, shall we jump into the questions? Are you ready?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so Pamela has asked a question of where in the US can she find an adenylyl B12 supplement? Cannot locate it anywhere. And her DNA 360 suggests that, yeah, she takes the adenylyl form. So if you go to Seeking Health, they have a sublingual form. Sublingual, as Dr. Varden mentioned, is under the tongue. It bypasses any gut absorption. And so they have a lozenge, if you will. Dr. Varden, do you have a different company that you go to for this?
Actually, I really like the Seeking Health, and that actually goes for Shelley's question, the next one, where she asked about where to buy folinic acid. Same thing. Seeking Health by Dr. Ben Lynch. He's the one who wrote the book Dirty Genes. A brilliant guy, has done a lot of research. Anyway, they've got great forms, sublingual. He even combines like the B12 and B9 in different forms. So you just kind of have to be aware of amounts or the types of forms. So
I will offer here, because so our CEO and I sometimes we lovingly butt heads, and I mean this in a very playful way. I don't mean it seriously. But when we were reevaluating what supplements do we keep, I had every single foot in the sand and every single up in arms around I'm keeping my methylation optimizer. No matter what we do, we're keeping it. And the reason for this is because it's really hard to come by non-methylated bees. And so if you go to our website, you will see something called Methylation Optimizer, and it's my little baby, it's my little passion project. There's no methyl bees in it. We do not have B12 in it, and this is for very strategic reasons, because we just talked about there's a lot of people out there that can't absorb that at the gut level, and so we kind of always more lean towards the sublingual, which is why I'd suggest Seeking Health for them. But if you're looking for that B complex that does not have methylated B vitamins, which is so hard to find, ours, and it's my little baby, so please go support my baby so that Tracy
to be honest,
can be like he won.
I have looked at hundreds of different supplements, B complexes and everything. I can't find any besides ours that have B vitamins without folate or cobalamin. So I mean, there are others like KEL. There's, I'm trying to think of a couple of the others. I know there's some others out there. I use Full Script, but just someone off the street can't just order from Full Script. You have to go through a practitioner. But honestly, if you can find Seeking Health, that really is the best way to get the correct forms that you need of your folate, of your cobalamin, and then using our methylation optimizer to really get that full suite of B vitamins. I mean, and it's not just the B vitamins. There are also other ingredients in there that are very, very useful, like inositol in the form of D-chiroinositol, choline, trimethylglycine. These are important to help support the methylation pathway as well. So very well sourced ingredients.
Yeah. We are very, very, very specific around quality control, because we will, I've seen far too many people abandon supplements because they got poor quality supplements and didn't see an impact.
Right.
So for Marianne, she's asking, how do we spell adenylyl? It's A-D.
Okay, I'll take this for you.
I appreciate you a lot.
I gotcha. I
appreciate you so much.
It's A-D-E-N OSYL. And then whether you have like, cobalamin or, folate or whatever, but that's what it is. Adenosyl, ADENOSYL. There
I
you go.
appreciate you. I cannot spell for the life of me. I am that spell check generation where I can see that little squiggly line the moment I'm talking. Like, I know I'm not spelling this right. All right. Okay, so Gail is asking a question. She is saying if she has genes that are relevant to methylation, so she's listing MTHFR, SHMT1, MTR, that are the worst, meaning suboptimal, is it likely that her children would have an issue? And so really asking to the end of inheritance of these genes. So Gail, I'm going to imagine the worst, meaning you have a homozygous suboptimal presentation. So Dr. Varden kind of mentioned a lot of letters, and she was saying, if you have two G's, you're probably good. If you have two A's, that's the worst form. So we're going to pretend across the board you have the worst. Your children are going to be inheriting half of that, meaning they are guaranteed, if AA is the worst form, they are guaranteed to be getting an A. And then Papa, right, is going to be contributing the other letter. And so there's going to be an element of it depends on the gene, right? Because some genes, if you get that heterozygous, let's pretend it's an A and a G, sometimes that's okay enough, right? So there's an element of we'd really have to do your genes and your children's genes, because there's a toss-up that happens when it comes to inheritance, as well as sometimes there's mutations. It's not common, but sometimes when data is being transferred, there's a mistake made. And so a child has a gene that doesn't make sense, even though the rest do. So I'd really encourage that your children kind of get that evaluation done, that 360, so that you know very pointedly. Yeah, and so she's saying like her daughter struggles with B12, and that could be to the end of it. It's that poor form, right? So I was that canary, right? I go to the supplement fair, I take something I shouldn't, I can tell right away. And I imagine, unfortunately, God bless your little babe is probably a canary like me. Whoops. Oh my. Okay. So Dr. Varden, Dee Dee is asking, um, she's listed her genes. And then
Mhm.
she's saying, does she need B vitamins? Okay, and so I wonder if you can speak to the question of how do you know if someone needs B vitamins?
Well, if you're human, you need B vitamins. It's just, how are you getting them?
Mhm.
I have said, before, for the last couple of years, get it from your food first.
Mm.
Okay. Um, we have been provided this beautiful array of foods that have B vitamins in there. And no matter what, you need the B vitamins. Because remember, I told you that they are like dominoes in that path, in that process. They are cofactors that are necessary for the methylation pathway to work. If you don't have those B vitamins, if you have none, you're not going to be working that process. So yes, absolutely, you need B vitamins, but do you need to take supplements? Well, that's the question. Yes, it's, maybe not. And the reason why I say that is, are you eating foods that give you that spectrum of B vitamins in the forms that your body can utilize? And are you getting enough of them? What Dr. Kosterman was saying in the beginning, that being a vegetarian and those people who are vegans, guess what? You are not getting the B12 that you need, because that really primarily comes from animal-based foods. When we're talking about, say, B1, thiamine, okay, this supports energy metabolism, nervous system function, lots of different things. Some of the best sources: pork, sunflower seeds, whole grains, legumes, your B12, riboflavin, okay, really important for energy production, antioxidant function. What's a great source? Beef liver. It's one of the richest sources in B12, and I mean, if you're like, yeah, I'm not eating that. They do.
There's hacks, but also it's delicious.
It can be if it's cooked right. I remember when I was young, my mom used to make liver and we used to
Oh.
douse it like ketchup or something on
Almost,
just
yeah. Oh,
anyway, it's
goodness.
kind of like,
Yeah.
would you like a little liver with your ketchup? Anyway, I have learned how to like it, but they do have desiccated beef liver caps, encapsulated form, or beef organs, or different types of organ,
Yeah.
from different things. But either
Yeah.
way, you know, where these vitamins are most rich in these foods, especially the B vitamins, we are looking at meats, eggs, mushrooms, almonds. I mean, yes, there are some for, the vegetable side, but not as rich. Okay, so let's like B3 niacin, okay? Really important for cellular energy, DNA repair, chicken breast, tuna, salmon, turkey. I mean, yes, there is some in like things like peanuts, brown rice, but again, B5, there's your beef liver, eggs, avocados, mushrooms, for B6. Again, chicken, turkey, beef, salmon, tuna,
Yeah.
all these different things. And I mean, I can keep going on and on. The same thing with folate. Now, this one, yes, it's also in beef liver, but like Dr. Kosterman said, leafy greens, dark leafy greens, that is really, such a rich source for the folate, that foliage. You have something
And
to say.
well, one thing I would just want our audience, so Dr. Verdon is, because she's so brilliant, is able to sit there and list all these B vitamins in order, which to me is very impressive. Um, but I think an important part to hear is, we've only really talked about two different B vitamins because at present we have two genes that really, or several, but we have several genes that speak to these two B vitamins. She also listed B5 and she listed B6. These are foundationally important cofactors to that teamwork, to that passing of the ball in order for methylation. Okay, so remember that even though we've kind of made the conversation a little bit myopic to different genes that we have very specific insight into, because there's so many different forms of these, remember that there's other players on the court. B6 is a player on the court, B5 is a player, magnesium, zinc. So as she's listing these foods, remember, she's not doing it for the sake of, let me list all the B vitamins because I'm smart, and she is. It's more also the education that there's a lot more to methylation. There's a lot more players on the court than just these few that we've mentioned. And the one other thing before we move on to Angeline's question is, remember, think about the other side of the equation too. Okay, so Dr. Verne's really talked about how are you getting them in? Do you need supplementation? That question. And oftentimes a practitioner is going to be able to answer that question of, do you need supplementation, based on what's going on in your life. You're on vacation and life is wonderful and lovely, maybe not so much. If you're in the midst of any sort of stress, physical, mental, etc., maybe you do. If you're sick, you probably do. So remember that a practitioner can really curate when is it most appropriate to be doing that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so we
yeah.
don't want to just focus on and only take a form of folate or a form of cobalamin. They're all important. Our bodies are so brilliantly and elegantly put together, and the foods that we eat have the spectrum for a reason.
Mhm.
So we need to provide our body with those basic building blocks, with those cofactors for these processes to work. Because I'll tell you, as a scientist, being in research and doing basic science, studies and everything else, and, being in that world, we scientists don't know everything. We don't.
No.
We are still scratching the surface. It is a constant practice and discovery. And, even then, things that we have learned can change as we learn even more. So, there, these B vitamins, the ways that we can support our bodies in methylation, there's still stuff that we don't really understand. So, just know, just know that work with what you do know, work with what we can,
Mhm.
work with a practitioner who has more knowledge and can guide you, so that way you're not just throwing darts in the dark and
Yeah.
hoping to hit something good.
Yeah. Yeah. I think more and more we need to acknowledge that humility is the most important trait within science, because humility enables you to say, this is what we knew and we walked it on that. But now that we know differently, we're going to act differently. And it's
Mm.
keeping up with what do we now know so we can act differently. Yeah. All right. Angeline. Angeline is asking, or she said, uh, she took a liposomal B vitamin complex, which to me is interesting. B vitamins, by their very nature, are water soluble, and so oftentimes offered in such form. So it's interesting to me that. Um, it says it's methylated. She took it, it made her more tired, especially on the second day. She started taking it every other day. Is that a good decision? Should I try another brand? So I'll kind of lay the liposomal thing to the side for a second, because to me that's interesting, and another brand is probably going to be water-based. So that might be the hiccup there. But what I would say, Angeline, is ensuring that you do get your genes tested. I would speculate you're someone possibly with that COMT that is a really slow shooter if you're reacting so quickly. But separate to that, it could also be some of your team members, and it's going to be really difficult to discern where that hiccup is. Um, Separate to that, and again, this is more where you do need to be working with a clinician. Sometimes I find when people who are nutritionally deficient, and you might be in Bs, the moment they're given those sorts of B vitamins or other supports in order to start healing, they'll become very tired. And it's usually for good reason, in the sense of it's enabling healing within the body, right? We are tired so that we're doing less so the body can focus on that healing. I do not suspect that's the case based on what you said, but you might want to have a practitioner evaluate that. And we can do that for you here if you have your 360. Okay. All right. Dr. Varden, I think this next one from Marianne is for you. I captured the information about the A versions of MTR and SHMT1, but she totally missed the MTHFR gene in this conversation, right? So do you want to go through, I guess for our audience, we talked about 2 SNPs or 2 pages in the books.
Mhm.
What are the optimal forms of those 2 pages for MTHFR or motherfucker? Because I'm told we have to say that more often.
Okay. So, well, and guys, I do want to let you know that there are actually 2 motherfucker genes, MTHFR genes, that we look at. And,
2 SNPs.
for
Yeah.
those of you who want to dive a little bit deeper, there's actually an identification code where it's like RS and then it has the numbers. So we do the ones that end in 1133 and 1131. The 1133 is kind of like, again, that bigger brother having a little bit stronger of an impact. But the 1131 also plays a factor. It's just not quite as prominent, but they do both affect the methylation. So the MTHFR for the 1133, which is the one you will see in your DNA 360 reports, the C allele, okay, the C variant is the optimal. So if you have CC, then you have optimal functioning of it. If you have a CT, if there's a T in there, then you have reduced enzymatic functionality, about 30 to 40% less activity. If you are a TT, I'm a TT, then you actually have a 70 to 80% less enzymatic activity for that MTHFR gene, the one ending in 1133. Now, the other MTHFR gene, the one ending in 1131, the A version is optimal. The C version is actually suboptimal. So if you have AA, you're fine. That's optimal. CC is actually what Dr. Kosterman had referred to as homozygous suboptimal. So there's those 2. Then for the SHMT1, the G allele is optimal, the A allele is suboptimal, and MTR A allele optimal, G allele suboptimal.
Do a little alphabet soup. I love it.
There we go. When you do this every day.
Susan has a question for you. Oh, okay. I think she's asking, so I think she's asking, is there a reason why we've separated B12 out of the supplement, right? And for folate, for B9, does it matter? Does it matter how you take that? Do we have to consider sublingual versus not? So do you want to speak to why B12 isn't part of our methylation optimizer? And then do you want to speak to B9, why it's in there?
Sure. So, okay, the reason why we do not put in the folate or the cobalamin, your B9 or your B12, is because first of all, we want to be able to have that methylation optimizer be useful to anyone. Well, if we put in a methylated form of B9 or B12, then it's not useful to everyone, because there are those, like we had said, that can't utilize the methylated forms of those two. So just so the base formulation can be useful to everyone, we've removed those and said, okay, so now based on your particular genes, you can take methylation optimizer, but then look at your genes and we will personalize the B9 and B12 by saying, okay, you need to get this elsewhere. And that's why we had said about like the Seeking Health has those forms. So that's why we don't include it, because we want that base formulation to be useful to anyone and everyone.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm going to do a double hitter here. I'm going to speak to both Janet's question and then Mary's question. So Janet is asking, using the team analogy, go sports, how do you know if, how do you know how to supplement if your whole team is slow or suboptimal? So remember, let's break the team up again a little bit. There's the team members that get the ball to the top of the court, and those are most of the genes except for COMT that Dr. Varden just reviewed. Okay. And so I would say that's really where you want to target your B9 and your B12, B6, et cetera, as well, but those two are kind of where you want to target, right? And so you do want to be considering, especially for suboptimal versions, how are you getting these nutrients into you? Okay. The how much really comes when we talk about that shooter person, right? And this comes in two different ways, and this is why I'm going to speak to Mary's question in a second. There are some people with a slow COMT who, that means the slow shooter, that means me, you're never getting a basket. Well, sometimes, but it's a blue moon basket, it's not an often basket. When they take B vitamins outside of food, it's too much. It's pushing. It's kind of like saying if you give a team its practice and you give them too many balls, the person at the top of the court, their problem isn't that they don't have enough balls, it's that they can't really work with them properly. So shoving B vitamins to the team, to that person at the top of the court, isn't going to be helpful. So I find sometimes with a slow COMT, you have to be very mindful not only of how many methylated B products you're taking, but also just how many B vitamins you're taking in general. It's very much an individualized question. I have a few slow COMTs that are fine with B complexes, but oftentimes they're not, and those tend to be the people who'll push more towards food. Now, Mary asked a separate question. Are there gene expressions or health issues that can make taking SAMe a problem? So SAMe is a supplement. Dr. Varden, are you able to offer the words to SAMe? It's S-adenosyl. Thank
Methionine.
you.
You're
Yep.
welcome.
I appreciate you. So SAMe is really popularized. I think its bigger claim to fame, or what most people know it for, is either helping with estrogen or helping with depression, anxiety, and some other mood things. Okay. And a big part of the reason is, again, SAMe works with COMT and pops that methyl on to turn things off, principally. Okay. And so again, think about this in terms of the basketball court. If you have me at the top of the court and you give me a whole bunch of SAMe, which is a methylated supplement, I can't do anything with that. I can barely get a basket, let alone if you give me a million balls to put in there. Okay. So for a lot of people that are on the slow side, right? That's the COMT-AA. Most people there should not be taking SAMe or other methyl B products on a high or regular basis. There's always going to be exceptions to that. Sometimes my slow comps in particular, the females, if they struggle a little bit with periods, sometimes SAMe leading up to period is very helpful. But again, this is more where we're getting into that precision medicine. And I would really encourage you to work with someone if you feel like SAMe might be of help to you, but you need guidance on how to do that. Okay, I hope those two explanations of the team and who's shooting are helpful. Again, remember, if you have a LeBron James shooting the ball and can handle a million balls, you have a lot more flexibility with what you're able to take and how often. C'est bon? Okay. Dr. Varden, Ty has a question, and Ty, I hope I'm saying your name right. Okay, Ty is saying if they were recommended adenylyl B12 lozenge, meaning so that B12 under the tongue, so we're skipping the gut, does that mean I shouldn't take a supplement that has hydroxycobalamin? Oh, I think that's an AOR product, right? It's that happy little combo product. Dr. Varden, do you have an answer for that one? I
Yeah,
do.
actually,
Beautiful.
you can take hydroxycobalamin.
Mhm.
That's not an issue. It's whether or not it is methylated. That's where the issue comes in. So, I mean, I know that's kind of a very basic answer to that, but when you think about what it is, what each is, and what they do, so like adenosylcobalamin, this is one of the two active coenzymes forms of B12. Okay, the other one being methylcobalamin. Really important for mitochondrial energy production, essential for ATP synthesis, etc. So when it comes to the adenylylated form, this actually helps to reduce what we call methylmalonic acid. Okay, high methylmalonic acid levels indicate a functional B12 deficiency. That can result in things like nerve damage, brain fog, fatigue, things like that. Adenosylcobalamin actually helps to lower the MMA, that methylmalonic acid. And, obviously that helps to prevent mitochondrial dysfunction. So when you're looking at, the benefits, who can benefit the most from adenosylcobalamin, this would people like chronic fatigue, mitochondrial dysfunction, athletes who need that enhanced energy, etc. When we get to hydroxycobalamin, so this is a precursor form of B12 that the body converts into methylcobalamin or adenosylcobalamin. So it kind of depends on where in the domino, that you want to support. Okay, and so the nice thing is, I do want to say though, guys, if you see cyanocobalamin in your supplementation, don't take that.
I love how bougie you are. It makes me happy.
Do that. That's got a cyanide molecule. It just you're putting more work on your liver to have to clear that toxin anyway. But for the hydroxo, it's just one step back in the actual process.
Okay. The only qualifier I would offer to that would be I've experienced clinically, and I haven't been able to find this in research. So just one thing to be mindful of, my slow comp, so the people that are comp to AA or that have me at the top of the court, sometimes I find hydroxy will push methylation a little bit in a disfavorable to aggressive way. And so if you're slow comped, can you maybe, it's a little bit of trial and error, but ideally, if you're buying from scratch, you already don't have supply, I'd really suggest finding that pure adenosyl, which is the Seeking Health that we spoke to.
Because again, you're that much further down the process. Your body doesn't have to do the extra work of conversion. So
yeah. All right. We have a last question this evening, Dr. Baden. All right. Jennifer. Oh, I love this question because it gets into Dr. Varden's mantra of test, don't guess. How do you monitor how to adjust supplementation if your B12 serum levels are always extremely high, even when Oh, even when not supplementing. Okay. So Jennifer, two things. I'm gonna allow Dr. Varden, or sorry, I'm gonna enable Dr. Varden in just a second to speak to this. But first thing, so Jennifer, when I have people doing their B12, right, I encourage that people stop taking B12 at least 2 weeks before they do the test, because we want it to wash out and we want to know a true level as opposed to a supplementation level. So just I'll make sure that you're not taking it 2 weeks before. Okay. And really check all your supplements again, because remember, marketing, B12 is in there a lot. Now, the one thing I'd really want you and your doctor to examine would be different trends, okay, within this blood work. What is the trend of your B12? And the reason I'm saying this is when the body is stressed, sometimes it will pump out, in particular, sorry, if the liver is stressed, it will pump out B12. And so abnormally high B12s that we don't really have explanation for can signal liver distress. So I'd really encourage you, again, I don't necessarily think this is what's going on, but I'd still really encourage you to work with your provider if you're saying, hey, I'm seeing this creep up, even though I'm not supplementing, even though, when I test, I'm not accidentally taking B12. But again, remember, look at things, because oftentimes it's in energy drinks, it's in supplements it shouldn't be in, it's sometimes in fortified foods. So remember that, not all tests are created equal. Dr. Varden, what are other things that you like to test for when you're thinking through methylation? I know you've already mentioned MMA, so methylmalonic acid, maybe.
Yeah, you got
Wait
that.
for me. Okay. What else are you testing for when you're thinking about methylation?
Homocysteine.
Mm-hmm.
Homocysteine, because you want to make sure that you are getting that methylation to turn that homocysteine into methionine. I want to mention that when you have high serum levels, okay, in blood of these vitamins, that is something that is only reflective on the B12 that's circulating in the bloodstream, not indicating whether B12 is getting into the cells. That's where it's really needed. That's where these processes are happening. And, I loved how you had mentioned about allowing that washout, to just kind of see how long, it has been to see whether or not your body is really able to absorb and utilize the B12 efficiently. Because I noticed you had up the FUT2 gene that we've mentioned earlier, and I believe she had said she had a GG version. Well, the GG version basically equates to you need the sublingual. But then you'd think, well, wait a minute, then why would the serum levels be high? Because that variant is linked to poor gut microbiome diversity, reduced ability to absorb B12 in the gut. There's different aspects that are going on here. Looking at
From the testing perspective.
yeah, from the testing aspect, I would even do some liver enzymes. Looking at AST, ALT, your alkaline phosphatase. I mean, more or less as a supportive measure going, how is the liver functioning? Enriching that full picture to see where other support, or maybe more so in some validation of what's going on.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, the liver stores and recycles B12. So high B12 without supplementation, words, end of the night.
We're so close. We're so close. You ready?
Yeah, because it could indicate reduced clearance or even a backup in that B12 metabolism.
Yeah.
And if kidney function is impaired, then excess B12 may not properly be excreted, because, like Dr. Kosterman said, B vitamins are water soluble. It's kind of like one of those things where, oh, if you don't use it, you pee it out. But hey, if there's, kidney function impairment, you're not
B12 is
excluding
the exception to that, right? B12
it.
tends, B12s are one that gets stored in the liver. So yeah, that's why it's a little bit more reliable on testing, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, I love
so
that.
yeah, I mean, even looking at uh, any gut dysbiosis, SIBO, or any type of issues when it comes to gut impairment that I had mentioned before. You've got, if you have a gut, that's leaky or that's having problems,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to start throwing some of those numbers off too. But again, definitely work with your practitioner.
I think, yeah, Jennifer, a provider at this point in time would probably be wise, unless you can say like, oh, I accidentally took B12 on the day of my test. I think reaching out to a provider would be really wise for you. All right, Dr. Vardens, why don't we, so we've talked a lot about the DNA 360. Do you want to talk about the bundle that we're currently offering, which is 10 or 15% off? You know numbers, I don't.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, hold on. I'll speak to the bundle. Oh, go ahead. No, please.
Well, no, I was going to say that we have our genetics insights bundle. This is the DNA 316 PGX, our pharmacogenetics testing. And
Please
this is
do.
for the month of March.
Mhm.
You will have the 10% discount automatically applied at checkout. And we have another special uh, goodness, heavens
You're
word.
so close. You're so close. Team, let's keep supporting Lara because we're all our words are gone this evening.
No, 11-hour day. Here we go. That we want people to encourage you to sign up for this month's He Summit, which will be focusing on erectile dysfunction. And that's happening March 18th to the 20th. And we are giving a 25% off registration that ends this Friday. So I believe that our angels might have put the bundle link and the He Summit discount in the chat. I'm seeing it right now. So
Yeah.
there you go.
So for those that are partnered to a male, you're very, very welcome to attend as well. I know sometimes females are like, should I be? But just be mindful that statistically speaking, study kind of backs up that female partners tend to be the people that support a lot of healthcare decisions within the relationship. And so women, females are not excluded from this conversation, right? You won't necessarily be able to share firsthand experience, but don't feel like if you are not a man or you don't have a penis that you're not welcome to this conference, because Dr. Varden and I hosted the She Summit 3 weeks ago, a period of time ago. And it was absolutely touching and delightful that we had men present because there were men that really wanted to understand their health of their partner or of, females within their life or their healthcare providers providing for. So while they are topical to men or women, we do not exclude people and we encourage it because I think that it's really important that I'm a woman. It's important to me that I understand male issues, just like I love when men understand my health issues. So please don't feel like you're excluded just because you don't have the anatomy that is being discussed. Yeah.
We support our counterparts.
It's important. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Medal, is it time to dance out?
It is.
It
And
is time to
I
dance
will
out.
say thank you so much for everyone hanging in there with us, sticking around for, the extra information, our special specials. Wow, I'm really having difficult.
We're so close. We're so close.
I love you guys for it. Thank you so much.
C'est quoi? Au revoir, mes amis. Au revoir. Time to dance.